What's up, YouTube? I am the Vanilla Nerd, and today I'm going to talk about the MCU character known as Baron Mordo from Doctor Strange 1 and Doctor Strange 2. There will be spoilers for both these movies, so if you haven't seen them, get out now. As well, there will be some small spoilers for Avengers Infinity War. So you've been warned. So in my Doctor Strange 1 video, I talked about how Baron Mordo had an excellent villain set up in Doctor Strange 1, and I don't renounce that. I think that's still a very true statement. I think they did an excellent job preparing his character to be this emotionally compelling villain in the future. However, when Doctor Strange 2 was finally made, they took Baron Mordo's character in that storyline in a very different direction. Quick recap. In Doctor Strange 1, Baron Mordo is a faithful follower of the Ancient One and Kamar-Taj. He is devout to a fault, because when his worldview shatters, when he learns the Ancient One is drawing power from the Dark Dimension and is not this perfect bastion of goodness, he breaks. He loses faith in sorcery, in the Ancient One, in everything. And furthermore, he's bothered that Doctor Strange is just as willing as the Ancient One to bend the rules in order to do good stuff. And in the after-credits scene of Doctor Strange 1, we see that his solution to this is to take away the sorcery from other people. There's too many sorcerers. He starts his villain arc of taking power from other people, ideally so that there's not more people out there bending the rules of nature and physics and the universe. But ultimately, we know he's a villain. We know he's a bad guy. He's stealing that power for himself, right? And this sets him up on a really good arc for future movies. But Doctor Strange 2 changes all of that. In Doctor Strange 2, The Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange goes on a trip through the multiverse and ends up on Earth 838, where he meets an alternate version of Baron Mordo. This guy has long braided hair, a cool sword, and looks arguably cooler. I don't know. Maybe people will like the staff of the Living Tribunal more than his generic sword. But I think the glowing sword is cooler, personally. Regardless, while this is clearly a multiverse version of the character of Baron Mordo, and clearly is very different from that Prime version, this version of the character prompts Doctor Strange to make this offhanded comment. Not that ever stopped you before, says Doctor Strange, referencing Baron Mordo's willingness to let his friends die. You know you hated me where I came from, and I bet secretly you hated me here. And this offhanded comment is what gets me so riled up, because it means that Doctor Strange has already fought the Baron Mordo of his universe, the Prime MCU universe, killing interesting storytelling that could take place as Doctor Strange learns of Baron Mordo's betrayal and desire to take the power from all the sorcerers, as we saw at the end credit scene of Doctor Strange 1. And worse still, this offhanded comment implies that Baron Mordo always hated Strange. And while that is one direction they could go with his character from the Prime Universe, it honestly negates all the good villain setup they did for Baron Mordo back in Doctor Strange 1. In Doctor Strange 1, Baron Mordo stands up for Strange. He encourages the Ancient One to take him on as her apprentice, and even trains Strange himself and is happy to do so. Now, maybe he learned to resent Strange, especially after Strange started messing with time and became too casual with messing with time. Maybe he even blames Doctor Strange for the events of Infinity War, but we don't know. And this offhanded comment from Doctor Strange in Doctor Strange 2, The Multiverse of Madness, reduces Baron Mordo to just another generic villain. Rather than being a layered, conflicted villain that he was set up to be back in the original movie, he's this regular villain who just hates Doctor Strange because he's bad and hates good guys. But let's imagine the opposite. Like, what if, in Doctor Strange 2, a different version of the movie, we learn that there is someone going around stealing sorcerer's powers, and Doctor Strange discovers that it's Baron Mordo. They haven't seen each other in years. We come to find out that Baron Mordo was snapped in the blip, but now he's back on his righteous rampage against sorcery, and as he's stealing power from all these sorcerers, he becomes this very big threat that Doctor Strange alone can't beat, and therefore you have an excuse to bring in the other cast of characters. And maybe, after Doctor Strange reveals that he gave up the Time Stone to Thanos, Baron Mordo loses it. Originally, he was willing to try and explain his motivations to Doctor Strange, but once he hears that terrible sin, he's determined to kill Strange. And even more interestingly, it would have been really cool to see Baron Mordo be correct to a degree. Like, Mordo's whole thing is the bill comes due. You can't bend the rules all the time, so showing Strange the consequence of bending the rules would have made him a more compelling villain. Maybe Strange even changes his ways as a result of Baron Mordo's beliefs. Now, Baron Mordo is still a villain. He is still stealing magic from good normal sorcerers who aren't bending the rules, but his ideology, his beliefs might have a grain of truth to them, a grain of truth that our hero can learn from, and that's the key to a good villain. Anyways, I just think Baron Mordo and the actor who plays him, I can't pronounce that name, but I think that guy could have carried a movie as a fully fledged villain, and they could have been a really interesting and well done villain as compared to the generic villains that plague the MCU, including and especially Caecilius, the villain from Doctor Strange 1. Ultimately, I recognize and understand that with Doctor Strange 2, they wanted to tell a multiverse story to try and connect the abysmal mess of movies that is Phase 5 into a semblance of a multiverse saga. I get it, but why can't we have that without ruining the future potential of Baron Mordo? Now, admittedly, a foreseeable Doctor Strange 3 could bring back Prime Baron Mordo and have him be the main villain against Doctor Strange. That's all good and well, but I feel like because of this offhanded comment from Doctor Strange in Doctor Strange 2, a lot of his character development, a lot of Baron Mordo's descent into villainy has already happened off-screen. And again, you could do some flashbacks to show those issues growing bigger and becoming a problem, so maybe all is not lost, but I doubt that's where they're going to go with Baron Mordo and with Doctor Strange 3. So ultimately, I'm making this video just to say it's unfortunate that we had such a good setup for a much more compelling villain in the sequel to Doctor Strange that was not used and somewhat wasted by the limited revelation we do have of his character in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And if they had gone with the more interesting villain route for Baron Mordo, like I just outlined, I think it would have retroactively made Doctor Strange 1 a more compelling movie, because again, we could see that clearly they were setting up his character to be something more, and that's why they kind of ignored the villain of Caecilius and didn't really care about his character that much. But I digress. Anywho, what are your thoughts on Baron Mordo? Is anyone else out there similarly bothered at the wasted potential of this character, or do you just not care? Leave your thoughts down below.